Vale.
Okay, so we are ready to start the next talk. My pleasure to introduce Yolanda Cabrera Casado from Universidad de Málaga. She's going to speak about, well, I don't recall, evolution algebras, I guess. So please, Yolanda.
Okay, good afternoon for everybody. First, it's a pleasure to participate in this school. It's a pity not to be there because I know that especially Floripa is a beautiful island, and there I met a lovely persons as Daniel and his family, and I have very good memories, but not possible this time. Okay, we share my screen. Okay. This talk is titled Natural Families in Evolution Algebra. This job is joint work with Mercedes Siles and Nadia, Boudi. And we start with a summary about evolution algebras, and then we talk about our topic. Now we define what we mean by evolution algebra. We have an algebra over an arbitrary field K, such that exists a basis so that when you multiply two different elements is 0. This basis is called natural basis. So we can write the element of the natural basis square in this way, and these coefficients, so-called structural constant, can be written as a matrix. This is known as a structural matrix. Jean-Paul Tian introduced this new type of algebra in his thesis, Evolution Algebra and Their Applications. Concretely, the evolution algebras were some of the contribution of the non-Mendelian genetics to mathematics. But what is non-Mendelian genetic? It is the genetic that it doesn't follow Mendel's law. So now I'm trying to explain roughly the Mendel's second law in terms of algebra, but firstly, we will need to recall some basic concepts relative to genetics. During sexual reproduction, male and female gametes and reproductive cells join to form a zygote. In general, for each factor or gene, we have two alleles from each of the gametes, one from our father and one from our mother. Alleles represent one of the forms this gene can take. For example, if we look at the hair color gene, the possible alleles will be simplifying a lot the different shades, brown, capital E, and blonde, E. In this case, we will say that this gene has the capital E and E genotype. On the other hand, the genotype is physically manifested in the individual in one way or another. We will say that it has one phenotype or another. The phenotype will therefore be the visible character of the corresponding genotype. What will the phenotype depend on? Sometimes of what is known as the dominant gene is written in capital letters. For example, in this particular case, we have a gene, the color of the flowers. For simplicity, we are going to assume that there are only two different ways in which this gene is presented, purple and white. That is, we have two alleles, capital N and G. Here we write capital N because it's the dominant allele. That is why our two plants are purple, presenting the capital NG genotype. From these plants, we manage to have gametes with the capital N and G alleles, and that when we grow, they will give rise to new zygotes with the capital NG genotype in the 50% of the cases, and with the capital N and GG genotype in 25%. So the new plants will be purple with a 75% chance. Now, the next step will be to build an algebraic structure that represents this junction. It is what is known as zygotic algebra related to two alleles. How do you do it? Easy. We consider the algebra generated by the three genotypes. We carry out the multiplication of each of the cases, just as we have multiplied capital NG by capital NG, and we obtain these results. Okay? It's easy to check that this algebra doesn't admit a natural basis, so it's not an evolution algebra. In fact, the evolution algebra is related with a particular case of asexual reproduction, which is not produced by fusion of the sexual cells. The possibility of AI, AJ doesn't make biological sense, and AI squared is interpreted as the self-replication. Some examples of non-Mendelian inheritance are the codominance and the reproduction of cocodrile, for example, where the heat of the nest will determine the sex of the cocodriles. Okay, the next question is, how do we know if an algebra is an evolution algebra? This question is treated in this recent paper. In it, we get the following result. If we have a family of inner products on a vector space and one of them has non-singular matrix, then the family is simultaneously orthogonalizable if and only if this set of matrices is commutative and each one of them is diagonalizable. Okay? Now, how do we apply this result in our case? First, we define the structure inner product as the projection of the product on its component with index I. So, an algebra is an evolution algebra if and only if the family of structure inner product is simultaneously orthogonalizable. There is another technique that we can find in the same paper. This uses the evolution test idea. If someone is interested about it, can see it in the section called with the same name. Okay. Some other property of evolution algebras are they are commutative and hence flexible. The direct sum of evolution algebra is an evolution algebra. In general, they aren't power associative algebra, and that's they aren't Jordan either alternative nor associative algebra. In this paper, they study the condition to know when an evolution algebra is power associative. And finally, if A is an evolution algebra, then the quotient algebra over an ideal, an arbitrary ideal, is an evolution algebra too. Okay? This result gives us the matrix of chain of bases and the relation between two structured matrices corresponding to two different bases. The first identity provided the condition to transform natural bases into natural bases. And the second identity gives us how to compute the new structured matrix. Okay, it's the two identities that we have in the first it. We note that clearly if we multiply each element of a natural basis by a non-zero scalar and reorder the element, we obtain another natural basis. When the only chains of basis matrices are of this type, we say that the evolution algebra has a unique basis. We observe that the set of all chain of basis matrices, when we have a unique natural basis, form a subgroup of the automorphic group called the semi-direct product of the symmetric group of all permutation of n elements. The dimension of the algebra is n, and the group K without 0 to the power n. Okay. Now we are going to see when an evolution algebra verifies this. Okay. to have a unique natural basis is equivalent to say that there exists a natural basis such that two different elements of basis square are linearly independent. Okay? When this happens, we say that the evolution algebra has the property 2Li. Okay? Observe that, therefore, this definition is consistent because it doesn't depend on the selecting natural basis. Now we are going to study some structure of the evolution algebra. The first thing that I would like to observe is that there are ideals which don't admit a natural basis. In particular, when the subalgebra or ideal has a natural basis, we have two new concepts: an evolution subalgebra and an evolution ideal. Okay? And these definitions are not redundant. It's enough to consider this example where we have an evolution subalgebra but isn't an ideal. Okay? Now we observe that not every basis of an evolution subalgebra can be extended to a natural basis of the whole algebra. When this happens, we say that the evolution subalgebra has the extension property. In this example, we see that there exists an evolution ideal whose basis can't extend into a basis of the whole algebra. Okay? We know that these definitions, evolution subalgebra and ideal, are different from Tian's ones, which are more restrictive. For Tian, evolution subalgebra is a subalgebra with both properties. It has a natural basis and extension property too. Okay. Sometimes working with graphs can help to know or visualize some property of the algebra. There are different ways of doing the connection between a graph and evolution algebra. For us, we construct the associated directed graph in this way. First, we draw as many vertices as elements of the basis we have. Then, since E1 appears in the expression of E1 squared, we draw an arrow from E1 to E1. That means a loop. Then, as E1 and E3 appear in the expression of E2 squared, we draw two arrows, and so on. Okay? Know that we just take into account if these coefficients are 0 or not. We don't consider a weighted graph. Okay? So the adjacency matrix will be made of zeros and ones only. However, this type of connection has some problems. For example, the graph associated to an evolution algebra depends on the chosen natural basis. And on the other hand, isomorphic evolution algebras don't imply isomorphic graphs, as shown in this example. Here we consider one evolution algebra related to two natural bases. Nevertheless, the corresponding graphs are not isomorphic. One is connected and the other one is not connected. This happens because the evolution algebra is degenerate. It means that E2 squared is 0. Okay, now then we are going to speak about non-degenerate property. When we speak of graphs, an important concept is the descendance of a vertex. Vertex or index is the same for us. We define the first generation descendant of B1. They will be those vertices or indices that are joined to the vertex by an arrow. Okay, in this case, we we can go from B1 to B2, and from B1 to B4. And the first generation descendant of B1 is 2 and 4. Now I do the same process, but this time to all the first generation descendants of B1. That means 2 and 4. In this way, we have those vertices that are joined to the vertex B1 by paths of length 2. Is B1 again, and B5, and with path of length 3, we have B2 and B4 and B6. And length 4, we have 2 and 5, and so on. The union of all descendants of finite order will form the set of all descendants of the vertex, 2, 4, 5, and 6. Okay? Okay, in this point now, we will focus on that element whose square is 0, non-degenerate, we say before. Concretely, we say that an evolution algebra is non-degenerate if the element of the basis square is different to 0. The element of the is different to 0. At first, we might think that this definition depends on the natural basis, but thanks to this characterization in terms of the annihilator of the algebra, we will say that this definition is independent of the chosen natural basis. The annihilator of an algebra are the element and unknown the algebra. Okay? And so this definition is doesn't depend on the basis, and this is an evolution ideal. It's easy to check this property. It's interesting to note that the quotient over the annihilator isn't a non-degenerate evolution algebra in general. Moreover, the rest of the elements of the basis that aren't in the annihilator don't form a subalgebra. Okay? Therefore, it's necessary to define a new concept, the absorption radical. Okay. First, we say that an ideal has the absorption property if the only elements that remain in the ideal when multiplied by the algebra are those of the ideal. Okay? Well, the annihilator of the quotient over this type of ideals is 0. But if we have many who verify this property, which one do we choose? Okay? We are going to consider the intersection of all ideals having the absorption property. See, the intersection of two ideals with the absorption property has the absorption property too. Okay? And we call it the absorption radical. Now we have that an algebra is non-degenerate if and only if the annihilator is 0, equivalent to say that the radical is 0, but now the quotient algebra over the absorption radical is non-degenerate. It's perfect for us. Okay? Now, before going on to talk about the possible decomposition of an algebra, let's see when an algebra has ideas or not. An algebra is simple if its square is non-zero and it has no more proper ideas than 0. Okay? A simple evolution algebra, clearly it has 0 annihilator, so it's not degenerate. That means in terms of the graph that it has no seams, vertices which emit no edges. Here we have a characterization of the simplicity in general case. We have that an evolution algebra is simple if and only if there were ideals generated by the squares of the elements of the basis, they have to coincide with the algebra. Or if and only if the evolution algebra can be written as the span of the square of the element of the basis, and also the descendants of each element are all vertices. Okay, it's two characterizations. In terms of the structural matrix, in the finite case, to say that an algebra is simple is to say that its structural matrix is regular, non-zero determinant, and also the matrix can't be expressed as a matrix with a zero block of digit. Okay? Okay, now in the case of the algebra is not simple, we can speak of reducibility, where we say that an evolution algebra is reducible if it can be written as a direct sum of evolution subalgebras. In the case of that these subalgebras are irreducible, not reducible, we will say that the decomposition is the optimal one. But a direct sum of what? Subalgebras, ideas, evolution ideas. Thanks to this proposition, doesn't matter to distinguish between them for this purpose. Okay? It's the same to speak evolution subalgebra, evolution ideas, or only idea when we speak about direct sum of subalgebras. Okay. In the infinite dimension case, we have that if the algebra can be written as direct sum of ideas, then these ideas are evolution ideas with extension property. Okay? This is very important because it's only to find ideas as a direct sum idea only in this type of ideas. Okay? Now for finite dimensional case, we have a characterization in terms of the structural matrix, which is a block diagonal matrix. As corollary, we say that a non-degenerate evolution algebra is irreducible if and only if the corresponding graph is connected. Okay? To close this section, we prove that if we have a non-degenerate evolution algebra, then there exists an optimal direct sum decomposition besides its unique. Okay? This decomposition is done through the composition of the graph into its connected components. Okay? We will do the decomposition into its connected component and is provided a optimal direct sum decomposition. Okay. Now, for this section, or with orthogonality, we are going to need some definitions related to orthogonality. Two elements are orthogonal if their product is zero. An orthogonal family will be formed by orthogonal vectors, okay? And if we have an orthogonal and linearly independent family with extension property, we will have an extending natural family. In the particular case of a vector with extension property, we say that it is a natural vector, okay? Then we will study when a vector is a natural vector. If a subspace is generated by an extending natural family, then we have an extending evolution subspace. The evolution rank is defined as the dimension of E squared. Okay? Note that the rank, therefore, doesn't depend on the basis. Moreover, orthogonality doesn't imply linear independency, even if the evolution algebra is non-degenerate. Okay, the following result characterizes natural vectors in terms of their support, but what the support of an element means is the set of all indices such that the corresponding coefficient in the expression of this element are different from zero. We can speak of the support of a set as the union of the support of each of the set elements. So we have that an element that has non-zero square can be extending to a natural basis of the whole algebra if and only if the element on its support square have rank 1. Okay? If it is in the case that the element has non-zero square. If an element has 0 square, this element is a natural vector if and only if each element of its support has 0 square. Okay? Or these elements belong to annihilator. Okay? Okay. Here we have another decomposition in terms of standing evolution subspaces. In this case, we have a family of subspaces, not necessarily subalgebras, generated as vector space by element of the natural basis, such that have evolution rank 1. Okay? You choose 2 elements of the different subspaces, then if you choose 2 elements of the different subspaces, then their squares are linearly independent. Okay, it's the dimension of ei squared plus ej squared is equivalent. Okay. Moreover, if the evolution algebra is non-degenerate, this decomposition is unique. Okay. In fact, if we have another natural basis and consider these decompositions, then the chain of basis matrix sends the elements of B0. B0 is the element who that generated the annihilator. Okay, B0 and B0 prime. Send the element of B0 to the linear span of the element of B0 prime, and in general, the element of Bi are sent to the linear span of the element of B prime 0 union B prime I, and so the chain of basis matrix has this form. Okay. Okay, and finally, we can say that a linearly independent orthogonal family of an extending evolution subspace of an evolution algebra can be extending to a natural basis if and only if their square elements are non-zero. Okay? And that's all. Thanks for everything.
Okay, are there any questions? Anyone? Maybe I had one. I don't know. So maybe I ask you, Yolanda. So you said that the graphs associated to a evolution algebra are not unique, right?
No.
So there is any way to go around that, or you just have to choose the basis and do you use much the graphs in the study of the evolution algebras or no?
If you your question is if the graph is used by the study of evolution algebras.
Yes. Yeah. How can you
Yes.
use the graphs to study?
Yes, because there are some property of the graph that this is important to determine the evolution algebra. For example, in the case of the algebra have a unique natural basis. For example, with in this case, we have an only basis. The other basis is reorder the elements, and reorder the element is isomorphic graphs.
Okay, so you can get the order.
In particular, in some particular cases, is interesting using the graph to study the evolution algebra.
Okay. All right. Any other comment? If not, let's thank Yolanda again.
Okay.
All right.
Okay.
Gracias.
Nada.
Vamos a coffee break. Un poco